in downtown Boston. And today I'm going to be talking to you about UI testing on the new Microsoft Edge, which is a Chromium-based browser. So this presentation is based on a blog post that I created last year during the COVID pandemic. And essentially, Microsoft last year released the full official Chromium Edge browser, which they released in January. And when they released that, they created a set of tools known as the Edge Selenium tools that essentially allows you to create and run automated tests on that. So Microsoft has a GitHub page for that, the Edge Selenium tools. And this essentially is what allows anyone to run automation on Edge. So that is Edge Selenium tools. I'm going to just basically do the brief introduction to all the puzzle pieces, and then I'm going to show you how anyone can actually run test automation on Microsoft Edge using Selenium and a Python tool called Selenium Base. So with the rebirth of Microsoft Edge in Chromium form comes a new WebDriver that allows you to take control of Edge and essentially automate it as and create tests for it, etc. So I played around with the new Edge Selenium tools, and I was able to incorporate that into a test framework I created called Selenium Base. And you can see here a test that's running. I'm going to run that exact same test that basically will spin up an Edge browser and run that test. So let's see. So I'm just going to jump to the command line on my computer. And I am going to run the Edge test. Let's see. 1 sec. Let's get this out of the way. All right, so if I click to run that, it's going to spin up an Edge browser on my computer, and it's going to run that exact test. And with the screen recording and all that going on, it's going to be slightly slower, quite a bit slower than usual. So it's using a Python tool called PyTest, which is a unit test runner, and then it's going to run the test where it spins up a Microsoft Edge Chromium browser, and it's going to go to the Edge settings page, and it's going to verify some elements on the screen. So as you can see here, it's going to highlight various things that it's checking, such as various text on the Edge settings screen. So you can see it's doing a check for Edge, and it is running quite a bit slower because I'm doing a video screen share, which is eating up quite a bit of bandwidth. But that is essentially a quick test of the settings page on Edge. Additionally, you can also run mobile tests on it. So I have another test lined up, which is test Skype site. And I'm going to set some command line options such as -edge and -mobile and use the Selenium-based dashboard, etc. And I'm going to run this test just like I did the previous test. And the screen might be a little cluttered because I have always lots of windows open of various things I'm working on at the same time. So don't mind the window mess. All right, so it's starting up the new Edge browser. So here, now that we're running this particular test on Microsoft Edge in mobile form, it's going to simulate a mobile phone within the web browser. So now I'm going to verify basic elements such as it wants you to install the app on mobile. It'll verify various buttons and links. It will click the links on the site. And you can see here, if you can see the screen share going, it's verifying all these different things, and it's running a mobile test right now. So here I'm verifying that the buttons such as get Skype for Android and get Skype for iPhone are showing up. So that was the test that we ran there. So if you want to see what that test looks like, let's go first to open, let's see, test Skype site. All right, so I'm going to open that. And essentially, first I check that when you're running a test. So first, the basic structure of a Selenium-based test. From Selenium base, import base case. That's the general import that you'll find at the top of Selenium-based tests, which essentially gives you access to the Selenium-based methods and the base case library, which for people here who have done a little bit of Python, this is a Python import statement here. And here we're creating a Python class. And this class is importing base case. And whenever a class imports, say, base case, it will have all of Selenium Base's methods available to all the test definitions that are defined within that class. So here we have a test that we ran, test Skype website on mobile. And basically, I checked that if one of the command line options that you use does not have -- mobile in it, which, as you saw right here, this basically tells you to run that same test, a Selenium-based test, but in mobile form. So if you're not running on mobile, we're going to say, hey, this test is only for mobile only, so we're going to skip it. Otherwise, we're going to run it as we did. So there are lots of simple commands such as open or self.open if you're working with Python class methods. And that will open this URL here, which we saw when we went to the Skype website. And then we also did an assert text method to basically say that it had install Skype listed at this CSS selector. So one of the big things when working with web automation is knowledge of CSS selectors, because these CSS selectors allow you to select any element on a web page so that you can perform actions on it, such as clicking, typing text into it, etc. So with this particular method, I can say assert that this particular text appears within this CSS selector. Additionally, when you saw me running the test, you saw that the browser would highlight the various elements on a page. And there's a Selenium-based method called highlight, which basically, if you run it and you provide a CSS selector, it will highlight that element on the page so that you can see exactly what the test is doing. So besides assert text, there's, say, assert element, which basically you provide a CSS selector and it'll assert that the element is there. And if the element was not on that page, then the test would fail. This was a really simple test. I didn't do much clicking at all. There's like one click, and there's no typing in text. I'm going to show you more advanced Selenium-based examples where you can type text into a text field, etc. So that is just an example of the Skype website test that we ran. Additionally, there was another test I ran, which was the edge test. So if I open that, you'll see that pretty much the only thing it did was highlight elements on a page. It's just a basic thing to show you that, hey, I'm checking that the element is there, because otherwise, if you're not running a test with the highlights, I mean, for continuous integration, you wouldn't use the highlight methods because that's solely for the purposes of demoing what the test is doing for, say, someone learning the framework. When you're actually building a test and running it on CI, it'll be even simpler than that. You'll be using basic methods such as like click, type, and open, etc. And you probably won't be using the highlight method. So that's a quick example of what Selenium-based tests may look like. I'm going to continue on with the dev.to post, which talks about the Edge Selenium tools. So essentially, this library, which was imported into Selenium base, allows you to spin up an Edge browser and allow you to set various options, such as mobile device emulation, when running a test. So let's see. So in order to make Edge automation work, you need Edge driver. And normally you'd have to go to the website, the developer website from Microsoft to download it. But Selenium Base basically provides you with a command line option, Selenium Base install Edge driver, which I'll just show you how that works. if you run that after you've installed Selenium Base, I know we're kind of going out of order. First, you would install Edge Driver, or first you'd install Selenium Base, then you install Edge Driver, and then you could start running some of the example tests from the Selenium Base repo on GitHub. So things are going to be slightly out of order, but all the pieces are going to come together before the end of this presentation. So if I run a command such as Selenium Base install Edge Driver, it's going to basically automatically detect the latest version of Edge Driver that exists from the Microsoft web page, and it's going to then download it and allow you to run tests using Edge Driver. So normally with Selenium, there isn't an automatic browser WebDriver management involved. Normally you'd have to like go to the websites themselves and download it and then throw it, say, the file on your system path. Selenium Base takes care of all of that for you by automatically going to the Microsoft web page, detecting the latest version of Edge Driver, downloading that, extracting the zip file, and then making it executable and throwing it into the Selenium Base drivers folder where it can be accessed so that even if you don't have access to the system path, it will automatically do that for you. So that's one of the things that Selenium Base will do for you. It'll let you, in just like a one-line command, install a WebDriver that you can use for your tests. All right, so going back to that article. Let's see, so this is how you'd handle the Edge Driver installation, which essentially lets you run tests on Microsoft Edge. And additionally, there's lots of command line arguments that you can use, such as -- mobile, which allows you to say, run a test using a mobile device emulator. And this allows you to run both web tests and mobile tests easily just by changing command line arguments. So let's see. The next part here is, let's see, I'm just scrolling down. So a lot of the work done for the new Microsoft Edge and the Edge driver, John Jansen, one of the Microsoft engineers, he basically created a lot of the tools that allow you to run automation for Microsoft Edge. So you might be familiar with him, and he's helped me out a bit in creating the things that I needed for Selenium Base. Also, for those of you who are not familiar with Simon Stewart, he's the one who created Selenium WebDriver back in the day, about 10 or so years ago, and now he's basically started what everyone knows today as Selenium WebDriver, and then that project expanded to all the various frameworks that use it today. So let's see. All right, so that is the basics of basically running a test on Edge with the Edge Selenium tools and Selenium Base. We're now going to go over to the Selenium Base GitHub page, where we can basically start from the beginning in how you'd set up your environment and how you might be able to use Selenium Base in order to automate your build pipelines, etc. So on the Selenium Base GitHub page, which you can find by going to github.com/seleniumbase/Selenium Base, you will find a README file with basically all the instructions and various features that are available to you when using Selenium Base. So to get started, you'd essentially install Python and make sure you have Python and Git added to your system path. So that's basically the first thing. Some of you may have already used Python, but if you haven't, you can go get Python from the python.org website, where it'll basically send you to download the latest version of Python. Additionally, in order to, say, git clone something, probably everyone here already has Git installed, but if you install Git, you'll be able to git clone pretty much any repo from GitHub instantly to your dev machine, etc. And another key thing that you'll want to know about when working with Python is that you should be using Python virtual environments. Now, Python virtual environments essentially allows you to create a boxed version of Python with various libraries installed, so that if you have different projects with different Python dependencies, they won't overlap and conflict with each other. So the key setting up a virtual environment is pretty straightforward. There's the ven command, which is included with Python 3+. And additionally, there is another tool called virtual env wrapper, which gives you the mk virtual env command. You can see the highlighting of the screen that I'm doing. And with those two commands, you can essentially create a Python virtual environment easily, which is probably the first thing you want to do after you have Python installed, but before you install Selenium base, so that any dependencies that Selenium base installs won't have any conflicts with any other Python packages that you may already be running on your system. And the commands for that are quite straightforward. For, say, Mac Linux users, it's just Python 3-m vend followed by the name of the virtual environment. And then you'd run a command source, that name /bin/activate, and that will activate the virtual environment. For Windows users, it's a slightly different command. You'd use py-m vend and then _env, for instance. And then you'd run a command called call /env/script/activate, and that will also create your virtual environment where you can install Python dependencies without worrying about conflicts with other Python packages. And then when you're done using the virtual environment and you want to exit it, you can just type deactivate, and it will switch out of your virtual environment. If you're already a Python user, you're probably familiar with Python virtual environments and you've used it before. So this is just mostly for, if you're new to Python, it's important to understand Python virtual environments, because that is a very key thing in basically boxing out your dependencies. However, if you're using a continuous integration thing such as GitHub Actions for GitHub workflows, Azure pipelines, etc., you probably don't need to create a Python virtual environment, because each of those runs automatically spins up a unique environment for you. So for instance, if I was running a test using GitHub Actions, which we'll be getting into later in this presentation, let's see, if we click on one of the details, you'll basically, GitHub Actions, for those of you who aren't familiar with, it basically is a simple CI/CD pipeline that you can attach to any of your GitHub projects. So in this example here, we have Selenium base using GitHub Actions in order to verify that like every new build of Selenium base that I push is working as expected, and that the tests that should pass continue to pass, etc. And GitHub Actions also allows you to, say, for Python, run basically split up your tests so that it runs on like every version of Python that you specify. So for instance, since we still support a lot of backwards compatibility, we still have a test that runs for Python 2.7, as well as the latest official version of Python, which is Python 3.9. And as you can see here, you can basically create several steps for getting your, say, Selenium base running in GitHub Actions. And one of the first things you do is, say, install dependencies, and then you install Selenium base. And actually, I'm not logged in here, so it won't let me expand that. One sec. If I go into another web browser where I have that open, you'll be able to, if you actually have your own GitHub Actions, you'll be able to expand that. So for instance, the line where you install dependencies, you'd run a command such as python-m pip install --upgrade pip, which first you want to make sure that you're running the latest version of pip, because pip is the Python package installer. Once you've installed and upgraded pip, you can install Selenium base by doing pip install Selenium base. So let's see. Or pip install -r requirements.txt. There are basically two ways of installing Selenium-based requirements. You can install from a requirements.txt file from a local clone of Selenium-base, as well as working with the pip install -e dot if you're working with the setup.py file of a cloned version of Selenium-base. If you're installing Selenium-base from the Python package index, which is the global repository for Python packages in the whole world, you could then just run pip install Selenium base, and it'll automatically install the latest version of Selenium base and all its dependencies so that you can immediately run tests. Although if you want to have example tests to run, you should probably clone the Selenium base repository on GitHub, where you'll have over 100 different examples, such as the two we ran earlier with the test Skype site and the Microsoft Edge settings page test. Those are just two of over 100 examples that you can run from the Selenium-based GitHub page. So installing Selenium-base, quite straightforward. You can just, as I just mentioned, install from the setup.py file, the requirements.txt file, or the from PyPy, the global package index. And then you can install, say, Edge. So in this particular test, I was using Chrome and Firefox. But if you want to then first install Microsoft Edge Chromium, you just do Selenium-base install Edge driver, and then it would automatically install that, and then which is similar to these commands here, where we run Selenium-base install Chrome driver if you're just running tests on Chrome, or Selenium-based install Gecko driver, which is what you would use for running tests on Firefox. But today we're just talking about Microsoft Edge automation. So once you have that installed, you can immediately start running tests, which is very straightforward. You can run a command such as pytest followed by the test name and any other command line options that you would want to use. And the example test that we're covering today will be --edge or --browser equals edge to run an edge test. And additionally, if you're running on CI/CD, it's very important to run the tests in headless mode so it doesn't spin up the full browser. And for that, there's a command line option --headless. So this is just a quick example of GitHub Actions, which many people use in order to run web automation. And GitHub gives you the ability to run tests like this absolutely free. So if we jump back onto the GitHub page, actually I have it in a window here. So that's basically one example of running your tests in CI/CD using GitHub Actions. Let's go back. So once you've installed that, pip install Selenium base, you've cloned the GitHub repo, you'll see that Selenium base has an examples folder. You'll actually find that at the top of Selenium base. And if you click into that, you will find basically hundreds of examples that you can run, such as the edge test that we ran earlier. And we're going to run a few more tests now just to show you some of the abilities that Selenium base has, but essentially allows you to quickly set up, automatically do your WebDriver management, etc., and run a test. And it uses all basic Python. So let's run another simple test where we, let's see, offline examples, ls, let's do pytest, test demo page, and then --edge in order to run the test on Edge. So here's a slightly more advanced example that is going to demonstrate more advanced commands for Selenium base, such as selecting option drop-downs, hover clicking, etc. So you'll see now it's spinning up the Edge browser, and if you run a test in headless mode, it's going to go a lot faster than if it actually needs to spin up a real browser. So here's a test with various different things. So I'm going to demonstrate typing in text into an input field, clicking a hover dropdown, clicking buttons, changing an input slider, selecting an option, clicking inside iframes, clicking checkboxes, clicking a checkbox that's located in an iframe, clicking a link, etc. So that was that test here. And if you're wondering what that test looks like, we're going to open that just so that you can see what that test is made of. There we go. All right. So here, once again, from Selenium base import base case, which is probably the line that you're going to have at the top of most of your Selenium base Python files. And additionally, you might use some other Python import statements, such as OS or PyTest. And there's a thing called PyTest markers, which basically, if you mark a test, you can run all the tests that use that particular marker by using a command pytest-m followed by the marker name. So here I could run pytest-m offline, and it'll automatically locate all the different tests that I have that are tagged with that marker and run them. And that essentially allows you to organize your tests in various ways. So in that particular test that I just ran, I essentially loaded an HTML file locally, although you could have just used the self.open command to get there as well. Then there are commands such as assert title to assert the title of a web page. Here we did an assert element to verify that the element appeared on the web page, assert text as you saw before. And here is the self.type command, which essentially, if you put in a CSS selector, and the # here is just a shortcut for an ID. So that means that look for an element with the ID my text input on the page, and then type in the text, this is automated, which you saw with that test. And then we also did a hover and click from a drop-down option there. So we ran the hover and click method. And that works just by basically selecting a CSS selector for the first option and for the top of the hover drop-down, and then the specific hover option that you want to click. So that's hover and click. Another unique method that we had here is basically in order to change the value of an input slider, you can essentially use, say, press right arrow or left arrow key, and that on a slider, and that will automatically like move that slider that many times, which you saw from that example. Additionally, there's a select option. It's basically an HTML tag select, which allows you to select an option from a list, and to work that, you'd basically put in the CSS selector for that, as well as the value that you want to click. I'll run the test one more time just so that you can see it in action again. You can do like simple assert false and assert true statements to verify that like is an element visible IMG. And you can switch to a frame, which is important when working with iframes because an iframe is like a separate website within a website itself. So if you want to work with iframes, you need to first switch into the frame. And then when you want to switch back to the regular website outside an iframe, you would then run a command switch to default content, which essentially takes you out of the iframe website within the website. So that's switching into iframes. Additionally, there are other methods such as, say, click visible elements, which basically you might want to use if you want to click, say, 10 different checkboxes on the same website that all have the same pretty much CSS selector. You can basically, if they all have, say, the same class name, you can then have a method like this, click all 10 checkboxes with just one line of code instead of having to individually select each checkbox. There are also some more advanced methods that we're getting to, but you can assert link text appears on the page, that like say that link appears, or you can also click link text to click that link. And that's just an example of some of the more advanced methods that we have here. We're now going to run that same test, but with an additional feature called demo mode, which basically allows you to see what the test is doing while it's doing it. So if I run that same test again, pytest test demo page.py --edge for the Edge browser. For older versions of Selenium base, you'd have to put --browser equals Edge. But I recently added the shortcut like a month ago, where you can just type --edge and essentially does the same thing as --browser equals Edge. So if I do --demo for demo mode, every time Selenium base performs an action on the web browser, you're going to actually see the assertion that it's doing. So let's spin up this test here. It's starting the Microsoft Edge browser, and when that runs, running pytest, followed by the test name, it's going to spin up, as you can see here. Microsoft Edge is spinning up. And let's see. All right. So it's spun up. And now you can see, oh, let me move the screen. So now every time it does an action, it's going to highlight what it's doing. As you can see, that's the added thing for demo mode. So you can see here, assert text, automation practice. Whenever there's an assert statement and you're running in demo mode, you're going to see the assert statement so that anyone watching the test can actually see what the test is doing. So that's a pretty cool thing. Assert text, this text is purple. Click the button, it changed. We're asserting a CSS selector with the SVG. We're asserting the CSS selector there, and then we're going to use the right arrow key to move the slider as it does there. And then it's going to assert that the value changed progress bar 100. Just some examples of various methods that you can use for easily clicking into a website, moving a slider, moving a select drop down, clicking inside an iframe, clicking out of the iframe, all while using the Microsoft Edge browser for the automation. And of course, we could run the same test using the mobile device emulator by using demo mode. By using --mobile mode. This is demo mode, which basically shows you the assert statements and highlights all the actions being done. And of course, if you run with demo mode, the test takes a lot longer because instead of zooming through all the actions, it's going to slowly go through and highlight and tell you what it's doing, which makes the test go way longer than before. So here it took 125 seconds because it was actually slowing down so that you can actually see all the various things that it was doing. Now, if we want to run the same test instead of demo mode, mobile mode, so --mobile, and using the Edge browser again, pytest, the name of the test file, followed by the browser that you want to use, and then any other additional options such as --mobile. Now we're going to run that test. It's going to spin up a browser. And here it's going to use the mobile device emulator to show you how this particular website would look on a mobile device. And I created this website, and I didn't make any special column realignments, so it just looks smaller if you actually go to the same website on a mobile device. And as you can see here, it's going to go a lot faster because it's not using demo mode, but these are just some of the advanced things that you can do. Let's see. So if we go look into the Selenium base examples folder, there's over 100 different examples. You can test various things like drag and drop, or using pytest markers, using various pytest fixtures, using test parameterization, etc. We can also do more various things. So one of the key things when you install Selenium base and you're at the top level Selenium base folder, if you type sbase, which is short for Selenium base, it essentially gives you the Selenium base commands that you can use. It'll also tell you the logo, the version of Selenium base that you have installed and where it's installed. You can type sbase or Selenium base followed by a command and parameters in order to work with the various console scripts. So the main one you saw before, install, which is how you'd install a driver. Selenium-based install Selenium-based install Edge driver for installing the Microsoft Edge driver for tests. However, in newer versions of Selenium-based, if you don't already have Edge driver installed, when you specify to run a test on Microsoft Edge, it'll automatically install the driver for you at the beginning of the test, just in case you've forgotten to run, like, say, Selenium-based install Edge driver when you first install the Selenium-based framework. Additionally, other commands that you have are Selenium-based methods, which lists the most common, like, Selenium-based methods that you can use, various command line options for PyTest, and PyTest is the unit test runner that is used for Selenium-based. You can create a directory with example tests already in it. You can translate a test from one language to another, etc. If you're using the Selenium Grid, more advanced feature here, you can do Selenium-based download server, and it'll download the Selenium server jar file, which allows you to instantly, like, start a grid hub and a grid node for it. It also has some commands for instantly converting your tests to use the page object model, etc. Or for there are also other various commands, but we're not going to have time to cover everything here. Let's go into S-based methods command so that you can see some of the common methods that you'll be using when using Selenium-based. So type in S-based methods, and you'll see a big list of methods such as open, type, click, link, where you can basically specify link text, go back to the previous page, select option by text, hover and click, drag and drop. Also a lot of get methods like get text, get the current URL, get the full page source of the web page that you're on. You can get, like, an attribute value, get the title of the web page, switch to a iframe, or switch back to the regular website from the iframe. You can even open a new window and say switch to a different window, or open a new driver, which basically it's more advanced than opening a new window. You can set a completely different set of Selenium command line options, such as, like, a regular website in one driver and a mobile version of the same website in, like, the different driver window, etc. Let's see. You can ask whether or not an element is visible, and then maybe use that in combination with a Python if statement. So if the element is visible, do this, or if the text is visible, do this, otherwise do that. You can easily save a screenshot from a test, or assert that the element is, say, visible on a page, asserting the text. You can also assert the title. You can assert that if you click a button that downloads a file, you can check that the file was downloaded, and you'll use some basic Python IO to check that that file appears in your downloads folder. You can run a really advanced command such as assert no 404 errors, which basically will check all the links on the web page that you're on, and if any of them have a 404 error, it'll then raise an exception. And then assert no JS errors, basically do something similar, but verify that there are no JavaScript errors on the page. Additionally, you have the Selenium-based dashboard, which here I ran a large number of tests, and you can get a pie chart, which basically shows you here are the tests that you ran, and here are the latest logs, and here are all the tests that passed. And I actually have a lot of tests that fail on purpose, mainly to demonstrate the Selenium-based logging abilities. So when you have a failing test, it gives you all the things you'll need to debug it. So in order to demonstrate that, we're going to run a test that fails on purpose. So we can do let's run a test suite where there are 2 passing tests and 2 failing tests. So let's run PyTest test suite, and then we're going to use --edge to run the tests on Microsoft Edge. Now let's create an HTML report. So --HTML equals report.html. Additionally, we're going to run with another command line argument called --dashboard, which also gives you the Selenium-based dashboard. We're going to go through that. And additionally, we're going to run another or add another command line argument --rs, which essentially allows multiple tests to reuse the same browser window, which will speed up test runs because instead of spinning up and spinning down a new browser for every single test that runs, you'll have all the tests share that browser window, which offers a significant increase in speed for running multiple tests at the same time. So adding all these in, PyTest, test suite, --edge, --html equals report.html, --dashboard, and --rs. We're going to run that, and it's going to spin up an Edge browser, and then it's going to run this suite of 4 different tests. And then we're going to go into the failure logs so you can see the screenshots that come with failing tests to basically help you debug any issue that you may encounter when running Selenium base. And as you can see here, a dashboard URL was created, and it's basically just going to go to a webcomic xkcd, and there's going to be 2 passing tests, 2 failing tests. And whenever a test fails, it'll take a screenshot and it'll add it to the Selenium-based report that is generated now that we're actually using Selenium-based reports, etc. Let's see, as soon as it finishes that, you'll see, okay, 2 tests failed, 2 passed. So if we go back and refresh the dashboard here, you'll see the 2 passing tests and the 2 failing tests, and the link to the latest logs that you'll get for failing tests. And for each failing test, you're going to get 3 different files. You're going to get a basic test info.txt file, which basically shows you the test, the specific test that was run, followed by the last page that the test was on when it failed, the browser that it was using, the timestamp, which is a Unix timestamp, and that converts to this date, which is based on my local time and time zone, UTC minus 500. And it'll be Saturday, February 13th, 2021. And here's the time. And here's the trace back. Here we go. File, this ran, and then exception, fake exception. This test fails on purpose, which basically I failed the test on purpose and a bunch of them so that you can see, okay, here are the logs that are generated. There's also going to be a screenshot.png file, which gives you the full page screenshot of the test that's on, and you can zoom in, zoom out, see the full thing. There's also the full .html file, so you can see exactly how the website was when the test failed, and this allows you to debug it. So in this particular thing, we've gone to not the actual xkcd.com, but it's a local file on my machine that it saved, pagesource.html, which basically gives you like an exact replica of the website itself for xkcd, so that you can say, okay, something went wrong. I know exactly what happened because I can see the full website here. So these are basically the 3 different log files that you'll see for every single failing test. When a test fails, the basic test info file, the page source file, and the screenshot, which allows you to very easily debug a failing test when it happened. So in this other test that failed, test 4, from that same test suite that I ran, fake element dot does not exist. The element was not present after 0.5 seconds. So I basically had the test assert that if the element was appearing on the web page, and this element is fake, so it didn't actually exist on that page, and the test failed, and therefore you get all these failure logs for that failing test. So that is the logging files for that. So additionally, this is the dashboard.html file. I also generated a report.html. So if I just swap that out for report.html, which is one of the command line options I use, you'll see not only this dashboard, but additionally something more advanced, like a full report, which basically shows you all the environmental variables that were being used when the test ran, such as the version of Python that was installed, the versions of PyTest, and all the other important Python packages related to PyTest plugins. a full summary. 4 tests ran in 31.44 seconds. And of these 4 tests, I had the 2 failing tests, and you have the full stack trace here in code format, as well as the screenshot of the failing test. And you can click in on the screenshot to get a bigger version of that screenshot. So this is just an example of the PyTest report.html, which basically combines the dashboard page you saw earlier with the full details of the environmental variables, test runtime, etc., stack traces, screenshots, etc. And at the bottom, we had the 2 tests that were passing of that test suite, because this was a 4-test test suite with 2 passing and 2 failing tests. So as you can see here, the logging system is very important. And Python has a thing called essentially the simple HTTP server, which basically allows you to take an HTML file located on your file system and host it on a actual website. Here we're hosting it on localhost port 1948 dashboard. So essentially, you can connect the Selenium-based dashboard to like your own website, etc., so that you can see test results as they come in. All this is open source, so if you're wondering how the dashboard is created, how all this works, I have a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of README files within the GitHub project, so that you can actually see all the various steps of how command line options work, etc. So that is basically running a failing test suite where you can see latest logs, etc. Let's jump back into the command line where we have Selenium-based options, which basically shows you like a lot of the various PyTest command line options that you can use when running your tests. So for instance, some of the common ones we had were -- browser equals browser, but now there's a shortcut where you can just use, say, -- edge instead of -- browser equals edge in order to set the browser option on the command line. And many of the Selenium-based features are features that you can set on the command line, so that you don't have to create like 20 versions of the same test in order to test that same test in various different ways. Like by just changing a command line option, you can run a test using a different browser. You can run a test using headless mode, which we covered, so that if you're running, say, in CI, it will not have to spin up a browser, etc. There's -- demo mode, which allows you to see exactly what a test is asserting while it's running. We didn't cover slow mode, but if demo mode wasn't slow enough for you, you can just use -- slow without the demo mode highlighting. We covered -- rs, which is short for -- reuse session, which basically allows you to run, say, multiple tests all within the same browser window, the same session, so that it will essentially spin up one browser and run all the tests one by one in that browser without having to spin down the browser and spin up a new one for every single test that runs. And additionally, if you're using the -- reuse session feature, there is a feature called -- crumbs, which also deletes all cookies between tests that reuse a session. And if your tests aren't reusing a session, you don't have to worry about that, because every single Selenium browser window that spins up has a totally clean cache and no cookies set. -- crumbs is only for tests that are reusing a session. You can also maximize the web browser window when it first starts up. By default, it uses like a fixed length, but you can change that. -- dashboard is what we use so that it would generate the dashboard file at dashboard.html. So that's another command line option that we demonstrated. You can also run using like incognito mode. Edge might have that as well for Chromium browsers. There's also guest mode. Edge also has Chromium's guest mode. You can run tests that have a specific PyTest marker by using -m marker. We didn't really cover that, but let's see, or a little, actually we did cover that, but I didn't run an example of that. You can also multi-thread the tests using that many threads, but if you don't have a lot of system memory, you don't want to be spitting up like 4 different or like 10 different browsers at the same time. But essentially with dash and num, you could multi-thread the tests if you've got a computer with a lot of memory, not this 2015, MacBook that probably isn't as fast as it could be today, but if you have a lot of memory, you can multi-thread the test easily, but even faster than multi-threading can be the reuse session feature, which basically just has all the tests one by one run in the same browser window without having to spin up a new browser each time. Let's see, -v verbose mode, which basically prints the full name of each test as it runs rather than 1 line per file. If you do -v, it'll be 1 line per every single test. So if a single test file has 4 different tests in it, you'll see that on the command line, 1 per line. We did cover --HTML equals report.html, which gave you that HTML report, which had the screenshots and the stack traces directly on that. So that was another thing. There's an option, another option with PyTest called --collect only or --co, so that you can see what type of tests that PyTest discovers before running them. And one of the cool features of PyTest is that it uses like a specific format to basically find all tests within a format. So if you have a test file that starts with like test underscore or ends with like underscore test, it'll automatically run that if you just like type PyTest and then run it. But in order to keep things like much faster, we were basically running like 1 test file at a time. So if you want to run the entire test suite, you can use that and then see what would run as an example. For debugging, there's a thing called --trace. So if you run a failed test, instead of having it exit right away, it'll keep the browser window open and let you debug so that you can actually see like what went wrong. And that we might have time to quickly demonstrate if I just run, say, actually, we'll run that later. We're running short on time, so I'm just going to try to quickly go through as much as possible. Let's see. -x will basically stop a failing test suite after the first failure is reached. So if you have like 100 tests and you want to basically fail the suite, if there's a single failure, you can just use -x and the whole test suite will fail after the first failure is reached. So I can quickly like get to that. It's one option. You have the ability to archive old log files instead of deleting them. And as we saw, the latest logs folder is created whenever there is a failing test, so that you get the 3 files, basic test info, the page source.html, and the screenshot. So in order to keep things like, from not taking up like tons of megabytes of space for all the failing tests that you have every time you run a test suite, every single run will then have a cleaned out latest logs folder. And if you use --archive logs, previous screenshots and failure logs from older tests will get saved. Additionally, if a test doesn't fail, you can use --save screenshot to save a screenshot at the end of each test. Otherwise, you only get the screenshots, as you saw before, with the failing tests. If you run a test suite with --check.js, you can check for JavaScript errors after every page load. So if there's a JavaScript error, it will fail the test. You can also change the start page when a test runs. Let's see, you can change the user agent string, which may be useful if you want to see how it's especially important when running tests with the mobile device emulator. So you can change your mobile device from, say, an Android to an iPhone, etc. Otherwise, if you just use --mobile, it's already selected default user agent strings and as well as mobile device metrics. And you can customize those on the command line, just like when you ran --mobile. Additionally, you have the ability to block ads when running tests, because sometimes that can get in the way of like certain actions. Let's see, you can choose to run with a settings file, but that's a little more advanced, and I don't have time to cover that now. --env, you can basically set a test environment so that you say --env equals QA or --env equals staging. It will run, you can then, inside your tests, have an if statement that basically says, if self.env equals QA, do this. If self.env equals staging, do that. That basically allows you to set your environment and run that from the command line. Additionally, you can pass in additional data into tests or disable the, say, content security policy of websites, which if you're using demo mode, which shows you a message of what it's asserting on a page, sometimes that requires an additional JavaScript library, and you may need to disable the content security policy in order to do everything that you want to do. You can specify the Selenium grid server IP with -- server, as well as the Selenium grid port. And you can even, on the command line, change the proxy server that you're using. So with -- proxy equals server port, connect to a proxy server port for tests. Or if it's an authenticated proxy server, -- proxy equals user:password at server:/port. And that's only some of the command line options that are available to you. I didn't have time to cover all the command line options. And then here are just some of the methods, as you see here, that are available to you. But there's over 200 different methods that come with Selenium base. And I just have a short summary here that you can use. So that's basically Selenium-based methods and options. And we ran through spinning up an Edge browser, getting failure logs, running the same test using like mobile mode, etc. And you have various other commands that you can use. We're not going to cover that, but essentially, if you want to read up on everything, because 1 hour is definitely not enough time to cover everything that Selenium base has to offer, there is the Selenium base GitHub page. You can just do a search, Selenium base on GitHub, and it will take you to the main Selenium base page where there's over 100 different example tests that you can run that basically show you all the various Selenium base features. There's even a Docker file if you want to run Selenium base in a Docker environment. So that's pretty straightforward. Docker build -t Selenium base for Docker users, and it'll run all this and set up your environment there. Basically has more advanced features that we didn't cover here, boilerplates, so that if you're setting up your test framework with Selenium base, it has a lot of things already covered. It has various features. Let's see, different syntax formats. We covered some of the console scripts. Let's see, additionally have the various syntax formats. This is the last thing I'm going to cover because I'm running out of time. It's 1 minute, which basically the main thing is that you want to have, for every test from Selenium base, import base case, and then you create your class that inherits base case, and then you create your test that should start with test _ so that PyTest will find it, and then you can use all the methods such as open, click, assert element, assert text, click link text, etc. And that is the main Selenium base syntax format. You can also use something more advanced, such as Selenium base subclass inheritance, which allows you to customize the setup and teardown of tests. And by setup automatically, you get a WebDriver window spun up for you automatically when the test begins, and it is spun down at teardown. And you can also use Selenium base as a PyTest fixture, etc. But if you're familiar with PyTest, you can look into that. And additionally, you have the ability to run Selenium base in multiple languages because there are 10 different language translations where literally all the imports are translated into one of the languages of your choice, French, Dutch, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, literally every single method, one-to-one mapping to 10 different languages. All right, and I think that's about all the time I have to cover. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Michael, for squeezing all of that into 1 hour. So that was a crash course on Selenium and Selenium base framework. I do have a question, Michael. Does the Selenium base also support SpecFlow or Gherkin?
SpecFlow, Gherkin. I'm not too familiar with those, but pretty much anything that's supported by Python will be supported. And the PyTest framework, which is basically a wrapper for Selenium base, because you run Selenium base tests with PyTest. If PyTest supports it, then yes, you can then also use it with Selenium base. Although if you're using PyTest fixture, then you'll need to use Selenium base as a fixture. And that was in the last minute that I had where it is one of the different syntax formats where you can use the SP fixture instead of the from Selenium base import base case import in order to run that.
So this is quite interesting, Michael. As you mentioned earlier, it's obviously supporting the modern development experiences, which even Microsoft is shifting its efforts to with GitHub and with support for Python. So that's very interesting. What can we expect from Selenium base as it evolves? I mean, what things do you have on the roadmap?
Well, there is actually a lot of features that I didn't cover, but aside from like testing websites, it can even help you design websites, but I didn't even get to those features like creating website tours, etc., or creating like graphs, charts, presentations, etc. So it's actually a lot of those advanced features that you may be thinking about might already exist, but I just didn't have time to cover it in 1 hour because this is like a much bigger than hour type of presentation for the full detail.
Well, much appreciated for joining us today, all the way from Boston. Did you say, Mike? Is that correct? Yeah.
Boston,
so thank you for
that. Is where I'm at, and if you want to learn more about Selenium Base, check out the GitHub page. If you like what you see, give the repo a star. We appreciate all the stars as we just passed 2,000 GitHub stars last night.
Fantastic. So please, Michael, if you could share any contact details in the chat window, that would be really helpful.
All right, sounds good. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub. Those are like the 3 big. So if you have any more questions, you can go to seleniumbase.com. There are different links where you can reach me, such as the Gitter chat, which is at the top, or linking to Twitter, or just opening a GitHub issue if I have a question, or GitHub Discussions, which is a brand new GitHub thing that just came out a few months ago, which essentially gives you a GitHub Discussions tab, which is located right here. And then anyone can like just start a general discussion about Selenium base. So GitHub Discussions, very useful. So lots of different ways to reach me. Pick your favorite one. I'm available on multiple channels. Selenium base on GitHub, very powerful. If you know a little Python, you can do a lot. We'll run Edge, Mobile Edge, all these different command line options. And I didn't get to cover every single feature, but it's pretty packed.
Well, there you go. Thank you once again, Michael. So that was Michael Mintz from Selenium Base all the way in Boston joining us today. So thank you for that. Again, another alternative approach to your test automations.